In January 1962, a bizarre and unsettling event unfolded in a small East African village that would later baffle psychologists, doctors, and sociologists alike. The phenomenon became known as the Tanganyika Laughter Epidemic, and despite its seemingly harmless name, it brought chaos, confusion, and a complete social breakdown to the region. What began as innocent giggling among a group of schoolgirls turned into one of the strangest outbreaks of mass hysteria in modern history. One that lasted months, spread across villages, and affected hundreds of people. The story began in the mission-run boarding school in the remote town of Kashasha, located near Lake Victoria in what was then Tanganyika, now part of Tanzania. On January 30, 1962, 3 schoolgirls suddenly began laughing uncontrollably during class. At first, teachers assumed it was typical teenage mischief, but the laughter didn't stop. It grew louder, stranger, and more contagious. Within hours, 95 of the 159 students, mostly girls between 12 and 18 years old, were affected. The laughter wasn't joyful. It was often hysterical, accompanied by crying, screaming, fainting, and fits of exhaustion. Some girls laughed for hours, even days, unable to control themselves. Others experienced physical symptoms: rashes, respiratory distress, and pain from prolonged laughter. Teachers were helpless. Attempts to calm the students or separate them only made things worse. Panic spread through the small, close-knit community. Within weeks, the epidemic had forced the school to close. But that didn't stop the laughter. When the students returned home, they carried the strange affliction with them. Soon, laughter outbreaks began appearing in nearby villages, Nshamba, Bukoba, and other parts of northwestern Tanganyika. In these areas, entire families, church congregations, and workforces began experiencing uncontrollable laughter, sometimes accompanied by crying, screaming, or violence. The phenomenon puzzled everyone. Local leaders thought it was witchcraft or a spiritual curse. Missionaries prayed over the victims. Health officials dispatched doctors, who could find no trace of toxins, disease, or infection. Yet the epidemic continued to spread across regions. At one point, reports estimated that over 1,000 people had been affected and that schools and workplaces had to shut down completely. But what could possibly cause an epidemic of laughter? Scientists at the time were forced to consider that this wasn't a disease of the body. It was a disease of the mind, triggered by psychological and social stress under extreme conditions. When medical experts and colonial administrators began investigating the strange outbreak, they quickly realized that no physical or infectious cause could explain what was happening. There were no pathogens, no contaminated water, and no external toxins. Instead, what they found was something far more complex, a psychosocial phenomenon that revealed deep cracks in the human psyche and the pressures of a society in transition. The early 1960s were a time of immense change in Tanganyika. The nation had just gained independence from British colonial rule in 1961. And while this political milestone brought hope, it also brought uncertainty, stress, and anxiety. Communities were grappling with shifting cultural norms, new education systems, and societal expectations that were often at odds with traditional ways of life. The school where the laughter began, Kashasha Mission School, was itself a symbol of this transformation. It was a strict British-style institution where young girls were educated in a disciplined, foreign curriculum, a radical change for many rural families. Psychologists later argued that the students, caught between traditional African values at home and Western expectations at school, were experiencing emotional tension and repression. This tension, they believed, manifested through mass psychogenic illness (MPI), commonly known as mass hysteria. In such cases, extreme psychological stress spreads unconsciously from person to person, especially in tightly knit groups, resulting in real physical symptoms despite no organic cause. The laughter, while outwardly humorous, was actually a collective nervous breakdown, an emotional release from the mounting pressures of post-colonial life. The epidemic followed a clear psychological pattern. It primarily affected young people, especially women, who were more vulnerable to social stress in that environment. The laughter often spread in places with close social interaction, schools, villages, and church gatherings, and faded once those environments were disrupted or people were separated. Medical teams from nearby Uganda and the World Health Organization, WHO, were brought in to observe, but even they were astonished. Reports noted that some victims laughed for several hours at a time, while others experienced relapses weeks later. Teachers and priests recorded diary entries describing classrooms filled with uncontrollable giggling and weeping, followed by eerie silence as exhaustion set in. As scientists began to understand the epidemic, they realized that the laughter wasn't a sign of happiness. It was a cry for help, a symptom of collective distress expressed in the only way the community's psyche could manage: through uncontrollable, contagious laughter. By mid-1963, more than a year after the first outbreak, the laughter epidemic had finally begun to fade, but not before leaving behind a trail of disruption and confusion. Schools were closed for months, local economies slowed, and entire communities were psychologically shaken. While no one died, the toll was undeniable. Students lost months of education, families were stigmatized, and local leaders were humiliated by their inability to explain or stop what seemed like madness spreading through the air. Eventually, the laughter subsided not because of a medical breakthrough, but because social stability slowly returned. Schools reopened gradually, affected individuals were separated and given time to rest, and as the novelty and panic wore off, the infection lost its psychological fuel. The epidemic had burned itself out, like a wildfire deprived of oxygen. In the years that followed, scientists and sociologists continued to study the Tanganyika case as one of the most dramatic examples of mass psychogenic illness, MPI, in history. The laughter epidemic demonstrated how psychological stress and social contagion can mimic the behavior of an infectious disease. Unlike viruses or bacteria, these outbreaks spread through emotion, empathy, and fear. Modern researchers suggest that the Tanganyika event reflected a society under extraordinary pressure. Post-colonial Tanganyika was a young nation grappling with identity, cultural clash, and uncertainty about the future. In that context, the laughter wasn't just random. It was a form of collective emotional discharge, an unconscious rebellion against authority, repression, and anxiety. What makes the incident even more fascinating is how contagious human emotion can be. Studies have since confirmed that laughter, fear, and stress can all spread socially, especially in tightly bound groups where individuals share similar pressures or emotional states. The Tanganyika outbreak was a magnified, extreme version of this phenomenon, showing how the mind's response to trauma can ripple through an entire community. Today, the laughter epidemic remains a staple case study in psychology, sociology, and neurology. It continues to challenge our understanding of how the human brain processes emotion, stress, and group behavior. The event also serves as a reminder that mental health and social context are inseparable, and that even something as seemingly harmless as laughter can reveal the deep, invisible strains within a community. In the end, the Tanganyika laughter epidemic stands as a haunting example of how psychological pain can disguise itself in joy, and how laughter, usually a symbol of unity and healing, can sometimes be the symptom of an entire society crying out for relief.